Hello, hi, welcome back. It's a full track of the What the Fuck is Cloud Native conference with Container Solutions. And I hope you had a really good break. And welcome back. Yes. So right now we have the Andrea Dobson for you. She's the head of people team at Container Solutions, and she's gonna talk about the psychological safety and the innovation at the company through the lens of the ancient Greek story. So without further ado, go ahead, Andrea.
Thanks, Roman. Yeah, so I will be talking a little bit about an ancient Greek story, but mainly I'm going to be covering how we can look at people processes and people aspects to basically get yourself ready for the future. So the story of Icarus actually lends itself very, very well to explain some of these key people processes. It's a story about innovation, risk management and assessment, people, and also a little bit about organizational structure. So when we talk about future proofing, we talk about risk and we talk about assessment. And that begs the question for us here today as well. What is the biggest risk our industry faces today? Is it the fight for innovation, or is it currently the big resignation? So this is what I'm going to cover today in my talk. First, I talk a little bit about risk and risk assessment and how we can do a good risk assessment and how it relates to innovation. Then I will talk about the growth mindset and its relationship to innovation and to get us ready for the future. And thirdly, I'll take a little bit of a step back and look at those organizational structures that we can implement in our organizations to again help us get ready for the future. But what Roman said, let's talk first about the story of Icarus. And I kind of assume most of you will know what this story is about. But just to rephrase it for the sake of the talk, both Icarus and his dad, Daedalus, were locked up in a tower. His father was a constructive engineer, and he was responsible in the old Greek era for building bridges, and he was quite important for the then king Theseus. So he thought it was a good idea to lock his most talented engineer in a tower. So while they're being locked up away in the tower, Icarus was about 18 years old at the time. And you can probably imagine that that's not the best place to be for an 18-year-old. So one day, staring at the window, sighing at the world beyond the tower, Icarus said, "Oh, I wish I could fly, and then I could escape from this tower." And this prompted his dad to innovate the idea or to think about the ideas of building wings. It took them several years to build this construction, these big wings that would take their weight. But one day when it was ready, they like you can see in this picture, they put the wings on them and they flew to their freedom. But before setting off, Daedalus warned Icarus. This innovation was also not perfect, and it warranted some risks. There were hazards that could increase the risk of an accident. For example, if you would fly too close to the water could wet the feathers holding the wings together, and he could therefore crash in the sea or in the ocean. If he would fly too high, the wax could be melted by the warmth of the sun, and therefore he could crash again to the ground. And even though Icarus was very aware of these hazards, he could not help himself and expose his wings to too much sun. And maybe it was Icarus that, due to his age, he had a higher vulnerability, and together with the exposures to the risk, exposure to the hazards increase his risk of an accident. We all know what happened to Icarus at the end of this story. So what is risk and what is risk assessment? Through this story of Icarus, we can see how important it is to look at different aspects of assessing the risk involved in looking at the future. We talked about hazards, water and the sun, exposure, being close to it or not close to it, and vulnerability, a young person in responsible for a potential hazardous a machine, the wings. So this example really shows us how important it is when you make a risk assessment that you look at all these aspects of the product. And wouldn't it be great that if we think of these things using our most rational brain? Are we? Mainly not. Mainly when we make a risk assessment, we do that very instinctively and mainly emotional driven. And this is what we this is what we use. The difference between that instinct brain and our rational brain is what Daniel Kahneman at the time called System 1 and System 2 information processing. And Daniel Kahneman is both a psychologist and a economist. And he wrote a book about this. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow. And for everybody who wants to read it, it's an absolute must read. So he distinguished these two key systems of information processing. The difference being mainly that system 1 is a very fast, automatic, frequent, very emotional, instinctive, impulsive system. We need that system because sometimes we do really need to make a quick decision. Specifically when we're in scary situations, dangerous situation, that's probably not the best time to really look at and assess all your options. Sometimes you just need to run. Our system 2 is important. System 2 is more slower, more conscious. We can make better risk analysis. We can think better. We can problem solve, and we can innovate in that system 2 thinking. We do have these two systems because we both need them. It takes little effort to use system 1 and it takes a bit more effort to use system 2. It has a bit of a bias. Our system 1 is not great at understanding logic and statistics. And unfortunately, we can also not turn it off. For example, let's look at this. You can see here 2 lines. Now, without thinking too much, which line is longer, the top line or the bottom line? You can put your answers in the chat umbrella if you want, and we can discuss this after I come out my talk. Your system 1 brain will say instinctively the top line. That's the longer one. But actually, both lines are exactly the same. And this example really illustrates how quick our system 1 system actually is, or system 1 thinking actually is. You cannot help to see the top line as longer. It's the automation that pushes you to that quick decision. Now, if you would force yourself to think again and look at both lines, you might be able to decide and look and see, hey, wait a minute, they're actually both the same length. And this example really illustrates when it comes to risk assessment, you really have to push yourself to think beyond your first and automatic response. You have to push yourself to think about what is it actually that is currently our risk and make that assessment more clearer. So focus on the actual routine. Go past your actually routine decisions. Force yourself to make more analytical thoughts, for example, by writing things down. So if you have written down your risk assessment, what's next? Innovation is one way to deal with the risks you see ahead of yourself. and another way of future-proofing your organization or your business. But with innovation, it's not always that easy, because what do you need to innovate? And how do you need to innovate? And when do you need to innovate? What will be the impact of your innovation? The future is very uncertain and pretty unpredictable, as we've all seen over the last year. So if you do not know what to innovate or where to innovate, what can you do? One second. You need the right people and the right structure to support this uncertainty and to be able to adapt to a potential ever-changing risk assessment. You need your people and your organizational structure to be able to continuously learn from both your mistakes and your improvements. And this leads me to the following: the growth mindset. The growth mindset is a concept of a concept introduced by Carol Dweck. And Carol Dweck was a psychology professor with Stanford University. And she described this mindset as a set of attitudes and beliefs about ourselves, and mainly how we see our skills and talents, how we give meaning to what we can and cannot do. And she looked at mindsets in two distinguishable ways. One was the growth mindset, and the other one was a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset is someone who believes that their talents and abilities are fixed, meaning they're finite and limited. And once you've reached your top, that's basically it. And people with a fixed mindset believe that they're either smart or they're not, they're talented or they're not. I can do this or I can't. On the other hand, the growth mindset believes that learning or abilities are unlimited and they can grow as much as they want to grow. They're convinced that by training, experience, and a lot of practice, they can improve their skills and abilities. If people believe existing skills make them valuable, or that they only achieve because of what they are and what they will become, they actually really fail to recognize the infinite power of continuous learning. And this can have an impact on innovation and therefore our way of future-proofing our organization. A fixed mindset can be an absolute creativity killer. Not only because a fixed mindset is fearful, it's merely fearful of making mistakes. They have learned through their experiences and their education or potentially upbringing that failing is shameful. And most people will go through great lengths to avoid these type of outcomes. In a sense, shame can trigger our system one thinking. And we have just learned that system one thinking does not allow for analytical thinking or analytical problem solving or innovation. It's a response that allows us to quickly respond, potentially in a dangerous situation. So what do we do when people have a fixed mindset? Well, Dweck actually has some solutions for those. And it's mainly in the fact that it is a mindset. It's not something we are born with. It's not something that is in your genes. We have learned these ideas about ourselves through, like I said, our upbringing and the way we've been giving meaning to experiences in our lives. And as she states, mindsets can be changed. And also a fixed mindset can be changed. And interesting enough, this week, the founder of the cognitive behavioral therapy, which was one of the most effective ways of changing mindset, has sadly passed away, Erin Beck. So she says mindsets can be changed. And this is a really interesting way of looking at your people and your people processes, and how this fixed mindset can potentially hold back some of your innovations and your learning experiences in your organization. I also believe that stepping away from the individual, that an organizational structure and processes can help with learning how to recognize these situations, how mistakes are made, how we can set ourselves up for a future, a future that feels like we're ready and prepared for the risk or any dangers that we might face. So that leads me to the following. Yes, there we are. The learning organization. The concept of the learning organization is not new. It was back in 1990 introduced by Peter Singer. And he stated in his book, The Fifth Discipline, that the learning organization is basically an organization that has all these employees that are great at, learning new things, adapting and transferring knowledge. And all that new knowledge that people have is then readdressed in new knowledges and new processes. And that allows them to be really ready for the future. And even though this was a vision at the time, it did instigate a lot of research and a lot of scholars and a lot of development plans to kind of see how people can become such an organization. And most of this work was done by David Gavin and Amy Edmondson, who we all know is a psychologist who researched a lot about psychological safety and is the author of the Fearless Organization. And what they did, so when they took it further, was they looked at organizations who had these type of elements, these acquiring, creating, and modifying elements in their processes and in their people. And they were able to develop some key toolkits and ways of measuring how someone is becoming more effective in adapting those new learnings. And that allowed other organizations to implement those insights and those elements of that learning organization. So what they learned mainly was that when an organization has some of these elements, is that they have key processes in place. And they called them pillars or learning or building blocks, as you can say. And I want to take you over some of these key building blocks that they discovered in these organizations. And we'll go into some of these building blocks, but not all of them because of time constraints today. But you can see here that they talk about supportive learning environments. And supportive learning environments, I will go into that one today, actually. And specific concrete learning processes, it's about the ability to set up experiments, to discover new data, to analyze data, and then take consequences from that. What does that new data tell you? What do you need to change? What do you need to keep? And reinforced learning. How can leadership or people in leadership positions within your organization stimulate that type of behavior that allows people to continuously learn? So that first building block, that supportive learning environment, they have the following key elements. And you'll recognize one of these because this is one of those that we talk about all the time. Whole conferences are dedicated to the psychological safety element of this building block. But there is more than just psychological safety, because just psychological safety won't get you to that learning organization. You need more more processes in place and behaviors in place in order to achieve that status. So what else do you need? You need to appreciate that people have different ideas and different views of looking at things. Learning can occur when we actually talk about different ideas that we have. If we have opposing ideas, having that discussion around what others might think is a solution for the same problem. Openness to ideas here really refers to the fact that we don't always learn when we want to correct a mistake or solving a problem. It's all about creating something new from a potential good status quo. And time for reflection is very much about the fact that if you cannot stop and think about what you've done and how you've done it, how are you going to be able to move forward? So you need to be able to think analytically. And if your people's brain is in a constant system one thinking because of stress and burnout, then they will hardly be able to access the system two thinking. What can leaders do? So leaders can do something very importantly. They need to be consistent and leading by example. When leaders are actively asking questions and listen to the people, and thereby potentially prompting dialogue and debate, you can see that people feel more encouraged and engaged in that conversation. If leaders can signal that the importance of spending time on problem identification and knowledge transfer and reflective post audits, all of these activities are more likely to flourish. And interesting enough, this was something that was also mentioned in Jamie's talk around the fuzzy front edge, that problem identification is just as important as solving the problems ahead of you. So what can you take away from this talk? Right, first of all, make sure that you have the right processes in place that allow you for a more rational risk assessment. For example, creating these psychological safe spaces, which will allow for more rational risk assessment. And even though you might give the right warning, be mindful, you might have an Icarus that might still want to go and, not taking mind of the hazards and his exposure. So how can we deal with our Icaruses? On an individual level, I think it's very important that we can focus on the growth mindset. And how can you do that? Through your hiring and your developmental efforts within your organization. But for sure, don't be like Theseus and lock up your most talented people. Support them and engage them. Enough for them not to want to leave your organization. That's the end of my talk, and thank you.
I think my internet connection.
That was great, Andrea. Yeah, we all have internet issues. That was really interesting. I don't think I knew the Icarus, which I probably should have.
Ooh, nice.
What is the first step for you of creating that growth mindset in an organization? What do you think for individuals? How do you foster that in an individual level?
So I think like I said in my key takeaway, right, there's a few things where you can foster that growth mindset in your organization, making sure you get the right people in. That's firstly, you have an impact on that as you're hiring. So there's ways that you can assess that in your hiring processes. And secondly, that mindset can be changed. So coaching efforts are really essential in the organization. So development, mentoring, or specific coaching can really help with this. And that's what we do in Container Solutions. Yeah.
And is coaching best done external? Is it done paired up with men with equal level, different levels? How does that work to not increase in quality?
So it can depend, right? There is no one size fits all type of answer for this. It could be that someone might feel better talking to somebody outside the organization to really have that feeling of like, look, I'm not talking to somebody at work here. I can really work through some of these issues. Or if it's very specific work related, it might be good to talk to somebody on within the organization that might not be your team, but is somewhere out of it. And that creates that like understanding within your work context.
Can an organization really be future-proof?
No. It's a good question. No, but you can prepare yourself as much as possible. As I said, the future is really unknown, right? We don't know. We can only prepare for it through these processes, and having these type of people around you. It will allow you to be more flexible and in a way agile for whatever the world's going to throw at you.
Is there a requirement that organizations have to continue? Like, we have sunset clauses, we have like APIs deprecate. Like, is there a time when you recognize as an organization that like it's okay, even though like part of your role is hiring people and employing people, but maybe you realize that your time is done? Is that an okay thing to recognize? And how do you deal with that? Because you will be taking away people's jobs.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's an easy question, but the answer is multifaceted, right? How do you go about that? Is that how do you close your business down, and how do you deal with the people aspect of that? I think that's every business executives level decision, what they do and whether they find that their time is up or not. That's a very personal decision, I guess. And being mindful that obviously you have certain responsibilities as a business owner and as an executive, and that you can't take that lightly. And I'm sure that most people will feel that. But for example, if you have failed to innovate and your time is dying out because of competitive advantages by others, you fail to innovate, it might not be up to you. It might just be what is happening to you.
You're locked in that tower, and you're responsible. Since you're responsible for all these lives, you're responsible to continue the innovation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I'm sure people want to pop into the Container Solutions booth and continue this debate. There was a lot of good feedback in the chat. It's not always easy, but I think being an open, psychologically safe organization and bringing in partners when possible is important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. And Bess, again, thank you all for having me and joining me today for these 30 minutes. I'm going to hop into Bella now to have a look at the chats.
Great. Thank you so much. And we have only a few minutes, so why not check out our sponsor booths during your break? Say hi to Nico at the Teleport team and to learn how you can access compute resources anywhere. See you back in 10 for Judy Rees on Connecting Beyond Remote Meetings. Thank you.